Montana Territory, July 1881, the summer sun hit hard that day, beating down on the dry earth outside the little town of Elkhorn, when Isaiah McCrae saw her again. Victoria Whitlow. She was standing by the mercantile porch, her hands wrapped around a jar of pickled peaches, eyes scanning the road like she was waiting on something or someone. He stopped cold in the middle of the street, dust swirling around his boots. She had not seen him yet. Her hair was still the same deep brown, braided down her back like it used to be, just longer now. Older, like him, Isaiah's chest tightened. It had been 8 years. 8 years since they were 16, picking wildflowers by the creek west of town, her laughter tangled in the breeze, her bare feet dusted in pollen. 8 years since he left to drive cattle down to Wyoming, promising he would come back. He never did, not until now. He stepped up onto the boardwalk. Victoria, she turned, froze, her eyes widened, mouth parted just a little, that same blue he remembered like sky before a storm. Isaiah, her voice cracked. I thought you were gone, he said. Yeah, I was. She set the jar down carefully. What are you doing here? Isaiah scratched the back of his neck. Bought a cabin out near the old wheat fields, figured it was time to come home. Victoria's mouth tugged at the edges like she wanted to smile but did not trust it yet. You always said you hated the cold. I still do, he said, grinning a little, but I hate regrets worse. She looked down at her hands. They were rougher than he remembered. She worked now, lived hard. The soft girl who used to braid flowers into his hat had turned into a woman who carried her own weight. I heard you went all the way to Colorado, she said. Wyoming. And back, he said. I worked ranches. Broke horses. You were gone a long time, I know. The silence between them stretched. Underneath it, something old stirred. Victoria. A little voice cried. A boy, no. A girl came sprinting down the road, dress flapping around her knees. She looked about 6 with a mess of curls and dirt on her face. She skidded to a halt beside Victoria and clutched her skirt. Is supper ready? The girl asked. In a bit, Victoria said, brushing hair out of the child's eyes. Then she looked up at Isaiah. This is Eliza. My daughter. Isaiah blinked. I married James Whitlow. He died last winter, fever. Isaiah's jaw tightened. I'm sorry, Victoria nodded, quiet. We manage. Eliza narrowed her eyes at him. Who are you? Isaiah squatted down. Name's Isaiah. I knew your mama when she was your size. Victoria snorted. He is lying. I was never that small. You were, he said, grinning. I was there. Eliza grinned back, toothy. You talk funny. Thank you kindly. Victoria shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. The sound wrapped around Isaiah like a rope he had been hoping would catch. He stood. Listen, I know I do not have a right to ask, but maybe I could walk you home, catch up. She hesitated. It's not far, I remember. They walked slow, Eliza skipping ahead. The shape of the land had not changed. The trees were taller, the sky just as wide. The path wound past the old oak where he once carved their initials. He saw the faded bark. The I+V was still there. Victoria noticed too. Her eyes lingered. You left, she said. Never wrote. I wanted to, he said. But then the years got away from me and I figured you moved on. I did, but not the way you think. Isaiah looked at her. You still pick wildflowers, she laughed softly. Not in a long time, he smiled. I was thinking. Maybe you would let me plant you some. A real garden, out by your porch. Her steps slowed. Why? Because I owe you a whole field of them, he said. Victoria looked at him, really looked. You still talk like a dreamer. Maybe, but I build things now. I got tools in my wagon. She stopped walking. You serious? He nodded. Dead serious. Eliza tugged her mother's hand. I want flowers. Isaiah crouched beside her again. Then that is what we will do. Victoria studied him for a long moment. Fine, she said. One corner of the yard. That is all you get, he grinned. That is all I need. They reached her little homestead. The porch was weathered, the shutters loose, but it was clean, cared for. Isaiah tipped his hat. I will be back tomorrow, early. I will believe it when I see it. He looked her in the eye. You will. And she did. The next morning he showed up with a wheelbarrow full of hand tools and a sack of seeds. He rolled up his sleeves, dropped to his knees in the dirt, and started digging. Victoria watched from the porch, arms crossed, hiding the small smile that tugged at her mouth. He worked every day that week, built a little fenced plot hauled in water from the creek, turned broken ground into soft soil. Eliza helped, grinning as she dropped seeds into the furrows. Isaiah taught her how to pat them down gentle. Victoria brought lemonade, then supper, then pie. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the shadows stretch over the land. The silence between them got easier. One night, after Eliza was asleep, Isaiah said, "I never stopped thinking about you." Victoria looked down at her hands. "I used to walk out by the creek, pick flowers. Pretend you would come back. I am sorry I made you wait. I stopped waiting." "I know," she looked up, "but I never stopped remembering." He reached for her hand. She let him. "You came back," she whispered. "I came to build you something good," he said. "Something that lasts." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We will see." He kissed her temple. "We will." And in the yard below, under the moonlight, the first green shoots of wildflowers pushed up through the earth. The days ran long that August, and the air held the dry tang of sage and sun-baked stone. Isaiah rose before the rooster most mornings, hitching his team at first light and rattling down the road toward Victoria's. The garden fence was near finished, cedar slats fitted tight between corner posts he'd notched by hand. He worked quiet, hands steady, letting the rhythm of labor speak where words couldn't. One evening, Victoria stepped out from the kitchen with a chipped tin cup of buttermilk. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, flour dusting her forearms. She passed him the cup, then leaned her hip against the porch rail. "You always this quiet when you work." Isaiah took a sip, then looked out at the rows of turned soil, now dark with evening shadow. "Only when I'm trying not to mess something up." She didn't reply right off. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods and a hawk circled high above the fields. "You could have gone anywhere after all those years," she said. "Why here?" He wiped the rim of the cup with his sleeve and handed it back. "Because everything I ever wanted was still here, and I didn't figure that out till I'd been gone too long." Victoria's gaze drifted toward the garden plot. Her voice dropped. "James tried to grow beans once. They all dried up." Isaiah didn't speak, just let her words settle. She didn't say it like a complaint, just a memory surfaced by the smell of fresh earth. "Were you ever married?" she asked. "No," he said. "Came close once in Cheyenne. She liked the idea of me more than the man." Victoria glanced at him. "And what kind of man are you now?" Isaiah set his hands on his hips, watching the last light catch on the fence posts. "One that knows where he belongs." She didn't answer, but her fingers brushed his as she took the cup. Inside, Eliza was humming to herself while she stacked kindling into a crooked tower by the stove. "Mama, can I take the blanket out to the pasture? You'll get it full of burrs," Victoria said, stepping in behind her. "I'll shake it out." Victoria looked to Isaiah. "She's been wanting to sleep under the stars." Isaiah gave a slow nod. "Let her. There's no better sky than this one." Victoria knelt beside her daughter, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You can stay out until the moon's above the barn. Then you come in, you hear." Eliza nodded solemnly and darted out with the old quilt under her arm. Victoria straightened. "You ever sleep outside anymore?" "Every night I can," Isaiah said. "Woke up once in the Tetons with frost on my lashes. Still worth it." She gave a low laugh. "You always had a strange idea of comfort." "It ain't comfort I'm after." Victoria tilted her head. "What then?" "Stillness," he said. "Something quiet that don't shift under your feet." She studied him, the way his shoulders had broadened, his eyes lined now at the corners. He wasn't the boy who used to chase her through creeks, but something older, weathered, settled. "You want to stay for supper?" she asked suddenly. Isaiah hesitated. "If it's not a trouble, you're already here." That night they ate by lamplight cornbread, stewed onions, and salted pork. Eliza fell asleep curled on the floor with the dog, her quilt tangled around her legs. Victoria cleared dishes while Isaiah dried. The quiet between them felt different than before, like something had shifted, not forward exactly, but deeper. "You remember when you cut your hand on that blackberry thicket?" she asked, voice low. Isaiah chuckled. "You wrapped it with your scarf, said I whined worse than a calf." "You did." He folded the last dish towel. "Still got the scar." She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "I still have that scarf." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. Isaiah stepped out onto the porch and Victoria followed. "You think those seeds'll take?" she asked. "They will," he said. You just got to give him time. She looked out over the dark field, her arms crossed against the chill. And what about people? Isaiah turned to her. They take longer, but they still grow if there's something worth growing for. She didn't look at him, not right away. But when she did, her eyes were steady. You plan on planting more than wildflowers? I was hoping to, he said. Victoria nodded once, slowly. Then you best come early, ground softer before the sun hits. I'll be here, he said. Soon as it breaks. Neither of them moved just yet. The night stretched wide and quiet, and the stars blinked into place above them, steady as the beat of a heart that had waited long enough. By late August, the garden had taken whole rows of green pushing through the soil like quiet promises. Everything Victoria had once believed beyond reach now gathered in slow-growing clusters, sweet peas curling up twine, calendula blooming in low golden bursts, and a patch of yarrow already drawing bees. Isaiah had worked careful, never rushing, never speaking more than needed. But his presence filled the yard like something steady. Like rain after dry years, one morning, Eliza trailed after him with a bucket of weeds, dragging it through the dirt with both hands. You think flowers can hear? She asked, squinting up at him. Isaiah leaned on the handle of the hoe. Reckon they can feel things if not hear 'em, like if you're rough or gentle. She nodded solemnly and bent to pat one of the sprouting stalks. I told this one my papa used to whistle when he worked. Isaiah set the hoe aside. What kind of tune? I don't know. Mama says she forgets. But I think it was happy. Victoria stood a short distance off, one hand shading her eyes. She had come out with a basket of laundry to hang, but now she simply watched them, her stillness heavier than usual. I'll take that to the compost, Isaiah said, nodding to Eliza's bucket. You go help your mama. When she ran off, he crossed to Victoria's side. She's trying to remember things I never told her, she said, not meeting his eyes. She's got a way of filling the quiet. Victoria laughed once softly. Sometimes I think she's older than me. Isaiah glanced toward the line where shirts and petticoats hung limp in the breeze. You've done more than most would have managed, she shook her head. There's things I don't know how to teach her, about men, about trust. Isaiah shifted his weight, boots pressing into the dry grass. Then let her watch. Victoria looked at him, puzzled. Let her watch how I treat you, he said. Let her learn that way. They stood without speaking for a time, the breeze moving through the cotton sheets like breath. When she finally turned back to her basket, there was something quieter in her face, but not closed. That evening, after supper, Isaiah didn't leave right away. Eliza had fallen asleep on the porch swing, a half-knitted doll blanket still wrapped around her hands. Victoria pulled a quilt over her, then walked with Isaiah toward the fence line. She don't like thunder, she said quietly. When it storms, she curls up under the bed. I could build a storm box, Isaiah offered. Nothing fancy. Just a place with thick walls and a lantern bracket. Victoria stopped walking. Why are you doing all this? He didn't try to fill the silence that followed. When the wind passed, he answered, because I left wrong. And if I can't undo that, I can still build something better. Her expression didn't change, but her voice softened. You never asked what happened to me after you left. I figured if you wanted to tell me, you would. She nodded slowly. I married James because he was kind and steady. But I didn't love him the way folks talk about in books, not the way I thought maybe I would once. Isaiah kept his eyes on the fence rails. It wasn't your fault, I know, it just wore on me, pretending I didn't miss something I never had. He looked at her then, and the last of the light caught her hair, turning it the color of chestnut bark. You don't have to pretend anymore, he said. She reached out, fingers brushing his wrist just that, and then dropped away. Come tomorrow, she murmured. There's something I want to show you. The next morning, she met him at the edge of the garden with 2 tin cups and a wrapped parcel of bread. They walked beyond the yard, past the cattle gate, and up a narrow trail that twisted among the hills. Eliza stayed behind with their neighbor's wife, who had come by to trade eggs for soap. They climbed in silence, the sun still low behind them. At the ridge, Victoria stopped. Below them stretched a hollowed meadow, ringed by pine and young aspen. Wildflowers had taken root here: fireweed, blue flax, and Queen Anne's lace in wide scatterings. The air smelled of resin and early bloom. This is where I come when I need to remember I still belong somewhere, she said. Isaiah took the bread and cups from her hands, setting them down on a flat rock. "This place looks like it waited for you," he said. She sat, pulling her skirt over her knees. "I always meant to bring Eliza, but I never knew how to explain it." "You don't have to." They ate in slow bites, listening to the birds in the brush. When they finished, she turned to him. "I want something more than visits and gardens," she said. "Not right away. But I think I want that with you." Isaiah didn't speak. He took her hand, slid his thumb along her knuckles. "I want that too," he said. She leaned into him, her head against his arm, and the meadow opened around them like something sacred. They stayed until the sun rose full over the ridge. Then they walked home together, slow, steady steps over familiar ground. September brought cooler air, and the first frost warnings whispered by the wind. Mornings turned crisp, and the garden Isaiah had coaxed from the hard ground began to curl at the edges, readying itself for sleep. Victoria had started drying herbs on the porch rail, bundles of lavender, mint, and tarragon tied with rough twine, their scent mixing with the smell of wood smoke from the stove inside. Isaiah had taken to eating his breakfast with them when he could, quietly, without ceremony. Some mornings, Eliza would bring out his coffee, proud to carry it without spilling, and he'd tip his hat in thanks before settling into the rocker beside Victoria. That particular morning, Victoria was mending the hem of her work skirt, thread looped through her fingers. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I got a letter from my sister in Bozeman." Isaiah leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. "Didn't know you had kin up that way, married a railroad man. She keeps asking me to move closer, says it'd be easier for Eliza's schooling." He waited, watching the way her fingers moved, steady and sure. "You think you might?" he asked. She looked up then, her eyes unreadable. "I told her no." Isaiah said nothing, just let the quiet hold steady between them. "I used to think I'd end up in a town like that," she went on, "one with a proper schoolhouse and a bakery on every corner, but when I picture it now, it doesn't sit right. Because it ain't home," he said. Victoria nodded. "And because there's something being built here, something I don't want to walk away from." He didn't reach for her hand, but he didn't need to. The space between them felt filled with something stronger than words. Later that day, he rode out to the edge of his land and returned with a wooden crate strapped behind his saddle. By the time he reached her place again, the sun was beginning to drop behind the ridge. Victoria stepped out as she heard the hooves. "What's that?" "Something I found in the attic of the old storehouse," he said, swinging down. "Thought it might be useful." He lifted the crate gently and carried it to the porch. Inside lay a rusted iron trellis, its paint long gone but the shape still strong, twisting vines of metal looping up like reaching hands. "You think it'll hold?" she asked. "I'll reinforce the base. It'll be solid." She ran her fingers along it, then looked up at him. "You plan on staying through the winter, if you'll have me," he said. She didn't answer right away. Eliza appeared at the door, rubbing her eyes. "Mama," the chimneys puffing smoke inside again. Victoria sighed, brushing her hands on her apron. "It's the flu. Gets stubborn when it's damp." Isaiah stepped forward. "I can take a look," she hesitated. "You don't need to do that, I know," he said, "but it's no trouble." Inside, the hearth was warm but smoky, the draft slow to pull. He knelt, checked the damper, then climbed out to the roof with a length of rope and a stiff, bristled broom. Victoria watched from below, arms wrapped around herself, until he called down that it was clear. When he came back in, soot streaked his forearm. "You always this handy?" she asked, handing him a damp cloth. "Only since I stopped drifting." That evening, they sat at the kitchen table while Eliza colored with burnt sticks on scraps of paper. Victoria poured tea, and they spoke of small things, how the coyotes had been louder the night before, how the hens were laying fewer eggs. When the girl's eyelids started to droop, Victoria carried her to the loft and tucked her in with the ease of long habit. When she returned, Isaiah was still at the table, hands folded in front of him. "I've been thinking," he said. "If you want to stay here come snow, I'll put up a windbreak on the north side, maybe dig a root cellar before the ground hardens." She sat across from him. "And what about you, Isaiah?" "What do you want?" He drew a breath, slow and full. "I want to wake up with the smell of your coffee on the stove. I want to build this place up so it stands against the wind. I want a life that's not just passing through." She leaned forward, her voice low. And you'd share that with us. With me and Eliza, he looked her full in the face. I already am. Outside, wind stirred the porch herbs, and inside, the lamp flickered just enough to throw soft light across the table. Victoria reached across, laid her hand over his. I want that too, she said. They sat like that for a long while, neither pulling away. And when the fire burned low and the house settled into quiet, there was nothing left between them that still needed proving. By early October, the last of the marigolds had turned brittle, and the trees along the creek wore their oranges and rust like old soldiers, proud but tired. Isaiah had started cutting firewood in earnest, stacking it in neat cords alongside the shed behind Victoria's house. The nights were longer, the air thinner, and when the wind pushed through the cracks in the walls, it carried more than cold, it carried the beginning of something settled. Isaiah came in from the woodpile with a splinter in his palm and the taste of pine pitch still in his mouth. Victoria was at the table with a folded ledger and a tin of coins, her brow furrowed. You planning to buy the bank? He asked, setting his gloves aside. She set the pencil down. I'm trying to stretch feed money through January. There's enough if we don't lose any more hens. He sat beside her, careful not to jostle the table. I've got feed sacks at the cabin. Wasn't sure if I'd stay long enough to use them. She looked at him. You said you were staying. I am, he said. I meant to haul them over this week anyhow. She reached into the tin and slid a few coins back into the folded cloth. I don't want you giving up what's yours. It's not giving anything up, he said. It's sharing. Victoria didn't speak right away. She folded the cloth, her hands slow but certain. You know, she said, I used to think I'd never feel safe with a man again, not because of anything James did, he was decent, but because I lived too long depending only on myself. Isaiah kept his eyes on the table. That's not an easy thing to unlearn, she nodded. But I want to try. He reached out, not to take her hand, but to brush his knuckle along the edge of hers. I'm here for the long haul, Victoria. You don't have to rush anything. She turned her hand over, palm up, and let their fingers rest together. That night, after Eliza was put to bed with a new quilt stitched from Isaiah's old work shirts, Victoria stood by the hearth, watching the flames through the grate. I've been thinking about Christmas, she said. Isaiah looked up from the kindling he was tying. It's a ways off. I want to host something small, just neighbors, maybe the preacher and his wife. Eliza's never had more than stew and a candle. Isaiah leaned back in the chair, arms resting on his thighs. Then we'll make it a celebration. I can bring down a goose, maybe trade for some molasses. She turned from the fire. You'll be here. If you'll have me, I'll be here every winter from now on. She stepped closer. What if I asked you to move into the cabin, not just keep your things there, but move in proper with us? He stood. I'd do it tomorrow. But only if we're clear about what that means. She looked up at him, her voice quiet. It means I choose you, not as a helper or a neighbor, as the man I want beside me when the years start to show. He touched her cheek, the calloused pad of his thumb soft against her skin. Then I'll pack my things in the morning. She didn't move away. You sure? I've never been more certain. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. When she stepped closer and rested her head against his chest, he wrapped his arms around her, and the crackle of the fire filled the room with its steady rhythm. By the next week, Isaiah's things were tucked into the corner room off the kitchen, and his tools hung on a fresh rack he'd built beside the shed. Eliza took to calling it Pa's Wall, though no one corrected her. Victoria only glanced once at Isaiah when she heard it, and he gave a small nod that said everything. Through autumn, they settled into a rhythm meals together, chores split without needing words, evenings spent with Victoria's sewing in her lap and Isaiah's boots resting by the stove. Eliza grew bolder, more curious. She followed Isaiah on his rounds, asked endless questions about the way he sharpened his drawknife or what made the mule bray at dusk. One evening, as the first snow dusted the fields, Victoria stood beside Isaiah outside the barn. The moon lit the frost like scattered salt. I've been thinking, she said. He tucked his hands in his coat pockets. That's always a good sign. She pulled something from her apron pocket, a small, worn leather strap with a brass ring at the end. This was my mother's, she said. She gave it to me before I married James. I never wore it after. Isaiah took it gently, turning it over in his hands. I want to wear it again, she said. Only if you'll have me as your wife. He looked at her, every line of her face familiar now. I've had you since the day I stepped off that wagon. She smiled then, small and full of light. Then we do this together. They were married before the frost held firm, in the parlor with Eliza holding a bouquet of dried cornflowers and the neighbor's wife playing an off-key hymn on the fiddle. No grand speeches, no lace. Just hands held tight and vows spoken low, and Isaiah pressing a kiss to Victoria's palm before he kissed her mouth. The winter settled in deep after that, but it did not feel long. Isaiah repaired the barn roof. Victoria taught Eliza to knit. They all took turns reading out loud from the Bible, and the one surviving novel Victoria had kept since girlhood, its pages soft and yellowed. Come spring, the garden bloomed early. The trellis Isaiah had set by the porch was now heavy with climbing sweet peas, and Eliza chased the dog between rows of lettuce and onions. Isaiah built a porch swing from cedar plank and hung it just outside the door. He and Victoria sat there many evenings, feet brushing the floorboards, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting over hers. Whatever sorrow they had carried, whatever years had passed them by, none of it held them back now. It was behind them, like the long shadows of a setting sun still there, but no longer leading. They were home, and they were together. Always.